Wyoming Territory, July 1883. The wind blew sharp across the open plain as the stagecoach wheels snapped loose and sent the whole rig tilting into a shallow ditch. Dust flew. Horses screamed. One of the passengers tumbled out with a yelp, landed on her knees and cursed softly. Tessa Bellamy stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt, her chest heaving. She was 23, tall for a woman, with a proud jaw and brown hair pinned too tightly to her scalp. Her boots were scuffed and her palms scraped, but she did not cry. She never did that anymore. The driver was shouting, trying to calm the horses. The other passengers, two elderly women and a man who had not spoken once since Cheyenne stayed, huddled inside. Tessa looked out across the dusty stretch of land. There was nothing in sight for miles but low hills and dry grass. Her chest tightened. She had left everything behind for this, and now she was stranded half a day's ride from the town of Red Bluff. "You all right?" The voice came from behind her, deep and calm. She turned fast, her fingers twitching toward the knife hidden in her boot. But the man standing there did not look like he meant trouble. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder and a worn hat pulled low over sun-darkened skin. His eyes were steady, the color of smoke. He looked about 30, maybe a bit more. Dust clung to his shirt and vest, and the way he stood quiet, solid, made her feel oddly safe. "I'm fine," she said, brushing her skirt again. "You from Red Bluff?" He nodded once. "Name's Rhodes Barrett. Was headed back from a cattle run. Saw your wheel snap." He looked at the tilted coach. "Driver's not fixing that without tools." "I figured that out myself," Tessa said, folding her arms. Rhodes's lips tugged, not quite a smile. "You headed somewhere?" "I was supposed to be starting a job at the boarding house. But I guess I'm walking now." "You will not make it to Red Bluff before nightfall," he said. "And you do not want to be out here after dark. I've slept in worse places." Rhodes tilted his head. "Still better to ride. My horse can carry two." Tessa hesitated. She had learned not to trust easily. But something about him, his calm voice, the way he waited instead of pushing, made her nod. "Fine. But I carry a knife." He stepped aside to let her pass. "Good, means you are smart." They rode in silence at first. The horses' hooves thudded over hard, packed ground, and the sun sank low behind the hills. Tessa sat stiffly behind him, one hand gripping the saddle horn, the other holding tight to her bag. "You got family in Red Bluff?" Rhodes asked. "No. Not anymore." He looked back slightly but did not ask more. She was glad for that. After a while she said, "I am not looking for saving if that is what you are thinking." "I am not thinking anything," he said. "You needed a ride. That is all." She studied the back of his neck, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yeah, got a place outside town, a few cattle, nothing much." "I had a place once," she said. "Then, after a beat with a man, he left, took my money. Left me with nothing." Rhodes did not turn. "That happened out east, St. Louis." He nodded again, like he understood more than he said. As the sky darkened, a storm rolled in fast. Lightning split the horizon. Rhodes cursed under his breath. "We will not make it to town dry." "My place is closer." Tessa hesitated, but the first raindrops hit her face. She nodded. They reached his cabin just as the rain came down hard. It was a small place, rough timber, smoke rising from the chimney. He swung down first, tied the horse, then helped her off. She stepped inside behind him and looked around. It was simple but clean. A single table, a wood stove, one bed. Her heart thudded. "I will sleep on the floor," he said, reading her thoughts. She said nothing, just walked to the stove and held her hands out to the warmth. Rhodes hung up his gun, then reached into a cabinet. "Dried meat, beans, coffee, not much else. I have had worse." She blinked as heat returned to her fingers. He fixed a quick meal, handed her a tin plate, and sat across the room from her as they ate. Thunder rolled outside. "You ever been married?" she asked. He shook his head. "Was not the right time, then I stopped looking." She watched him for a moment. His face was quiet, unreadable. "I am not a virgin," she said suddenly, her voice flat. Rhodes looked up slowly, set his plate down. His eyes met hers, steady, calm. "I never asked you to be," he said. She stared at him, waiting for judgment. There was none. "I just thought you should know," she said, softer now. He nodded. "You did not owe me that, but thank you." The silence stretched. "You do not talk much, do you?" she asked. "Only when it matters." She stood, walked to the window, rain tapping soft against the glass. Her shoulders dropped just a little. "I do not expect anything," she said. "I am just trying to start over." Rhodes stood too, slowly. He walked over, stopped beside her, but did not touch. "Then start here," he said. "You are safe." Tessa turned to him. Her eyes were wet, but she blinked fast. "I do not want saving. I am not offering that," Rhodes said. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "All right," she said. They stood there in the quiet, two people with nothing left to lose. Thunder rolled again, but inside the cabin it was warm. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa did not feel alone. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and the air heavy with the scent of wet sage. Tessa stepped outside barefoot, the hem of her dress brushing the worn porch planks. Low clouds hugged the distant hills, and a single hawk circled above the cottonwoods along the dry creek. Inside, Rhodes set a kettle over the stove and sliced a chunk of cornbread from a tin wrapped in cloth. He didn't glance up when she came in, only said, "Coffee's near ready." She nodded and sat on the stool by the table, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Her face looked softer in the morning light, less guarded. "I'll need to head to the boarding house today," she said. "Even if the coach never makes it. You'll want to speak with me, Givens, owner. She takes to straight talk but not to excuses." Tessa looked up. "You know her. She helped me settle here," he said. "Sold me this land for less than it's worth. People think she's hard, but she just don't have patience for lies." Tessa nodded, absorbing that. Rhodes poured 2 mugs and set one in front of her. She took it without a word. "You got plans beyond work?" he asked. She stared into the steam. "I'm tired of plans. I just want to earn what I eat, sleep without looking over my shoulder." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That's fair," she glanced at him. "What about you?" "I keep the cattle from wandering, patch the roof when it leaks, ride out to help when I'm asked." "It's enough." "Doesn't sound like much." "It's steady," he said. They ate in silence after that, the kind that held no tension, only a quiet understanding that neither of them had much use for filling space with words. When she stood, he fetched her boots from beside the hearth. "Town's 5 miles or so, I can take you." She looked at him, then out the window. "I can walk it." "You could," he said, "but you don't have to." She hesitated, then nodded once. As he saddled the horse, she watched him from the fence rail, noting how he moved with a kind of patience that didn't come from laziness. He checked the cinch twice, rubbed the animal's neck before mounting. When he reached down a hand to help her up, she took it without flinching. They rode under a pale sky, the last of the storm clouds trailing east. The prairie rolled wide and open, dotted with prickly pear and the occasional jackrabbit darting for cover. Tessa kept her eyes ahead, but every so often she'd glance at Rhodes's profile. "You always been alone out here?" she asked. "Had a brother?" "He died on the trail drive to Abilene. Fever took him fast." She waited a beat. "I'm sorry." He gave a slight nod. "Left me the land. I was supposed to sell it, head back east, didn't." "Why not?" He didn't answer right away. "Felt wrong. Like leaving something unfinished." She didn't push. By the time they reached Red Bluff, the sun had risen high enough to bake the mud dry at the edges. The town was modest, an iron pump by the mercantile, a few wagons parked outside the smithy, voices spilling from the saloon like heat. The boarding house stood east of the main road, its clapboard paint peeling but the porch swept clean. Tessa dismounted and brushed her skirt smooth. Rhodes stayed on the horse, but his eyes stayed on her. "You sure you don't want to come in?" she asked. He shook his head. "This part's yours." She stepped closer. "You always stand back like that. Let folks sort their own trouble, only when they're strong enough to do it." She held his gaze, then nodded. "I'll see you around, if you want to," he said. She turned and walked up the porch steps without looking back. But once she reached the door, she paused. Then, without turning, she said, "Thank you." Rhodes touched the brim of his hat. "You're welcome." He waited until the door closed behind her before turning the horse back toward his land. The morning was warm now, the wind dry and steady. He didn't look behind him once. Inside, Tessa stood before Me Givens, who wore a navy dress and a hard expression. She asked questions fast, her eyes sharp and assessing. Tessa answered each one plain and steady. When Me finally said, "You'll start with the linens," Tessa nodded and reached for the basket without hesitation. By evening, her arms ached from wringing sheets and hauling pails. She stood at the window of her small upstairs room, looking out toward the far hills. Somewhere beyond them was a cabin with smoke in the chimney and a man who didn't ask for more than she could give. She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased a little. Tomorrow she'd wake early and do it all again. Maybe the day after she'd ride out with a basket of bread, not to return anything, just to see if the coffee still tasted the same. Tessa carried herself differently after 3 weeks in Red Bluff, not with pride, not yet, but with the steadiness of someone who'd proven she could endure without asking anyone to watch her do it. Her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors, her wrists ached from swinging the flat iron over linens. Yet when she walked through the boarding house halls, her chin was set and her steps sure. Me Givens never spoke praise aloud, but she hadn't had to. A second key had appeared in Tessa's apron pocket one morning, unlocking the pantry Me usually kept to herself. That was all the permission she needed to know she'd earned her place. On her one afternoon off each week, Tessa walked west. Not far, just past the cluster of cottonwoods where the creek ran shallow, toward the rise of hills that opened out into the first stretch of true open land. Sometimes she sat on a flat rock and watched the clouds shift. Sometimes she just walked until her legs felt loose again. It was late August by the time she saw him again. He was leaning beside the water trough outside the cooper's shop, hat pulled low, a coil of rope looped over one shoulder. He didn't spot her at first. She stood across the street, one hand on the strap of her market basket, watching him like someone studying a memory to see if it still held true. When he finally turned, he didn't smile, just tipped his hat and said, "You look well." "I'm working," she said. "It suits me." He nodded once, then stepped aside as a freight wagon rumbled past. She crossed the street when it cleared. "I came out your way last week," he said. "Didn't see you at the ridge. I don't always go the same time. You left a ribbon tied to the fence post." She blinked. "You saw that. I figured it was for me." "It wasn't," she said, then added, "not at first." Rhodes set the coil of rope on the ground. "I had a calf go lame, been up nights tending it. You always talk about animals first," he considered that. "They're easier to explain." Tessa's mouth curved, not into a smile but something close. "You come to town for supplies." "No," he said. "I came to see if you'd walk with me." She didn't move right away. "I'm not looking for a rescue. I'm not offering one." They walked behind the smithy, where the noise died down and the air smelled of dry grass and sun-warmed soil. A rail fence ran the length of the pasture behind the livery. Tessa leaned against it, arms folded. "I used to think starting over meant pretending nothing had ever touched me," she said. "Like I could just step out clean." You don't believe that now. No, she looked at the sky. Now I think it means carrying it better. He was quiet a moment. I don't need you to be new, she turned to him. I need to know something, all right. If you take my hand, I'm not just company, I'm not something to pass the time. He stepped closer. You're not. She watched his face. I've been touched by men who didn't see me, who left marks that weren't bruises but stayed longer. I see you, he said. She didn't look away. I said something back at your cabin, about what I'd been. I said it like it was a warning, he nodded. I don't regret saying it, she added. But I don't want it to be the only thing you remember. It's not, he said. His voice was low, steady. I remember how you stood in the doorway when the rain came, like you'd had storms inside you longer than that one lasted. Her breath caught just slightly. I remember you didn't flinch when I offered my hand, he went on. You looked me square and decided it for yourself. She looked down, then back up. You're not afraid of what I've been. No, he said. I'm only thinking about what we could be. She reached out then, slow and deliberate, and took his hand. He held it like it wasn't something fragile, but something real. They stood that way until the sun dipped low, and the whistle from the last freight train echoed across the valley. You want to come out with me tomorrow? He asked. Fence needs mending. It's slow work, but the view's good. I'll bring bread, she said. Rhodes let go of her hand only when she did. Then I'll see you at first light. And when she turned to walk back to the boarding house, she didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't need to. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Tessa stepped off the boarding house porch, a wrapped bundle of bread cradled in one arm, her shawl drawn tight against the early chill. The soil was still cool beneath her boots, dew clinging to the tops of the grass like tiny beads of glass. Out past the feed store, she saw him waiting beside his horse, one boot braced on the rail, reins looped loosely in his hand. Rhodes didn't wave. He didn't need to. She crossed to him, and he took the bundle from her without comment, tucking it into his saddlebag like it was something valuable. She mounted behind him, her fingers settling lightly against his waist, and they rode out before the town had fully stirred. They followed a game trail that wound through scattered pines, the kind of narrow path a wagon couldn't pass, but a horse could carry to just fine. A meadow opened beyond the trees, and Rhodes slowed the animal to a walk, letting it graze along the edge while he dismounted and uncoiled a length of new wire from his pack. Fence line runs east from here, he said, pointing to where a post leaned half-collapsed. Something broke through last week, might have been elk. Tessa knelt beside the post, fingers brushing the cracked base. You always fix it yourself. No one else will, Rhodes replied, pulling off his gloves. And I don't like asking for hands unless I have to. She reached for the hammer without asking. Show me what to hold. They worked in rhythm for hours, the sound of metal striking wood echoing across the empty land. He never rushed her, never corrected her hand unless she asked. When they broke for water, he passed her the canteen without looking away from the horizon. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Not in years, Rhodes said. Why? She shrugged, taking a long drink. Just wondering what keeps a man steady in one place. He sat down on a flat rock, elbows resting on his knees. You ever feel like there's places that don't need explaining, like they already know how to hold what you've carried? She sat beside him. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of running. He turned his head slightly. You still feel like you're running? No, she said. Not since I rode out here with you. They didn't speak again for a while. The wind moved through the dry grass in long, sighing waves, and a red-tailed hawk drifted overhead, its shadow sliding across the dirt. Rhodes pulled a small tin from his coat and opened it. Inside were 3 coins, a broken button, and a folded scrap of paper. "This was my brother's," he said, handing her the paper. "He wrote it before he got sick, never showed it to anyone." Tessa unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. It was a list. One was buy land, another build a house with windows that open. The last said don't die alone. She handed it back. "You think he was afraid?" "Yeah," Rhodes said, "but not of dying. He just didn't want to go without anyone knowing who he'd been." Tessa tucked her hands under her knees. "I think about that too, not dying but being forgotten." "I won't forget you," Rhodes said. "Not ever." She didn't reply, but her eyes stayed on his face, steady and unreadable. When the sun passed directly overhead, they shared the bread on a flat patch of ground. He ate slowly, careful not to speak with his mouth full. She watched the way he broke each piece clean, dividing it evenly without asking. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He looked at her. "Only around people I don't have to prove anything to." She smiled then, faint and fleeting, not for show, just because it came. Later, as they rode back, her head rested lightly against his back, her hands no longer tentative. The horse moved at an easy pace, and Rhodes kept one hand on the reins, the other resting across his thigh. They reached the edge of town just as the bell above the schoolhouse rang twice. Children's voices echoed down the lane, and the scent of evening cook fires drifted through the air. He stopped the horse beside the boarding house gate. Tessa didn't dismount right away. "I don't know how to do this," she said softly, not lifting her head. "Don't need to know," Rhodes said. "You just have to want to." She looked down at her hands. "I want to." He turned to face her, one hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb brushing the skin just below her eye. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't look away. "Then stay," he said. She nodded. "Not tonight. But soon." He helped her down, his hand lingering at her waist for a moment longer than needed. "Next Sunday," she said. "I'll bring something more than bread." "I'll be waiting," he said. And as she turned and walked up the steps, Rhodes stood still, the last of the sun catching the side of his face. He didn't call after her. He didn't have to. The first frost came early that year. Tessa pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out of the boarding house before sunrise, the hem of her skirt brushing brittle grass tipped in white. The sky was a soft gray, the kind that promised a clear, cold day. She carried a small covered basket in one arm and a folded flannel shirt tucked under the other. Her apron was clean, her hair braided neatly, and her breath fogged the air as she walked. Rhodes was already outside when she reached the cabin, kneeling beside a makeshift pen, checking the fencing with a gloved hand. A young steer stood inside, its breath rising in thin plumes. He glanced up when he heard her boots, then stood, brushing his hands off on his coat. "You're early," he said. "You left before dawn last week," she said. "I figured I'd return the favor." He opened the gate for her and watched her step through. "You bring breakfast, something close," she said, lifting the lid. "Stew and oat cakes and this." She held out the folded shirt. He took it, unfolded it slowly, and ran his hand over the worn flannel. "Yours, my father's," she said. "I'd like you to have it." Rhodes didn't speak right away. He folded the shirt again, more carefully this time, and tucked it under his arm. "I'll wear it next time it snows," he said. They ate by the stove, quiet except for the soft clink of spoons against tin. Tessa poured hot coffee from a kettle and added a pinch of crushed cinnamon bark. Rhodes looked at her over the rim of his mug. "You always putting new things in what's familiar?" he asked. "Only if it makes it better." He set the mug down. "There's something I want to show you." She followed him outside, past the lean-to and down a narrow footpath she hadn't noticed before. It led to a clearing where the earth sloped gently toward a stand of cottonwoods. At the far edge, a stack of milled boards lay beneath a tarp, bound with twine. I started cutting them last winter, he said. Wasn't sure what for yet. Tessa walked to the pile and touched the edge of a plank. You building something? I was thinking of adding to the cabin. Room enough for 2 or more, she turned to face him. You're sure? I'm not guessing at anything, he said. I don't want you to keep walking back to town after every Sunday. I want you to stay, if you want that too. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes swept the clearing, the trees, the land that matched the quiet in her chest. I want a life with hands in the soil, she said. I want to wake up and know the day's mine to shape. I want to belong somewhere again. You belong here, he said. She stepped toward him and touched the collar of his coat. Then build it. I'll help. They married before the first snow stayed. Me Givens stood as witness, her hair pinned in a bun tight enough to hold through a windstorm, her face unreadable until she hugged Tessa hard enough to make her breath hitch. Rhodes wore a dark coat brushed clean and the boots he only used for Sunday rides. Tessa wore a simple dress the color of wheat, stitched by hand in the weeks between chores. They said their vows in the back room of the mercantile, under a row of drying herbs and a single oil lamp. No one made any speeches. No one needed to. That evening they rode home together and found the cabin warm, a new roof beam in place and a second pair of boots by the door. They shared the stew Tessa had set on the stove that morning, and afterward, Rhodes lit the lamp and stood beside her at the window. I don't have much, he said. You have this, she said, leaning into him. And me. Winter settled in slow and deep, but the cabin stayed warm. Tessa mended the curtains, planted bulbs in clay pots, and learned the quiet rhythm of mornings that didn't require rushing. Rhodes built shelves, repaired the barn door, and carved a shallow dish for her hairpins. They spoke less than most couples, but everything that needed saying was said in the way he laid her boots by the fire, or the way she left his coffee warming without being asked. One night, near the end of February, she woke to find him watching her, his hand resting lightly on her hip. There's a new calf out there, he whispered, born just after midnight. She smiled in the dark. Then spring's coming. I think it is. The snow melted by March and the creek ran full again. They walked its edge one afternoon, her hand in his, the sound of water steady and sure. She paused at the bend and looked out over the open land. Do you ever wonder what your brother would think of all this? Rhodes didn't speak for a while. Then he said, he'd say I found what he wanted. Tessa turned to him. And what do you say? I say I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Years passed, the cabin grew, so did the garden. A child came, then another. A boy with his father's quiet eyes and a girl who asked questions no one could answer fast enough. The days were full of scraped knees, sunburned shoulders, and the kind of laughter that came easy when there was nothing to prove. Me Givens passed on one summer, and the boarding house changed hands, but Tessa never returned to live there. She visited sometimes, always with something from the garden. The room she once stayed in was let to a new girl, one just off the stage from Kansas City, with dirt under her fingernails and a guarded look that Tessa recognized. She didn't offer advice, just left a bundle of oat cakes on the windowsill. Rhodes taught the boy how to mend a fence and the girl how to read a trail. Tessa taught them both how to braid rope and how to keep the sourdough from dying. In the evenings, when the children slept and the fire burned low, she and Rhodes sat by the hearth, their hands laced together, not for comfort, but because they'd built something worth holding on to. Nothing was ever easy. But everything they had, they'd made with their own hands. And in every quiet morning, in every full breath drawn beside the person who had seen them whole and never looked away, there was peace, earned and lasting.